Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Tinnitist TV. If you love great music documentaries, then really, who doesn't? I've got one to put on your watch list. It's called Ronnies, and it chronicles the life and times of British jazz saxophonist Ronnie Scott and the world-famous club that he started in London decades ago and which is still going strong today. Directed by Oliver Murray, the film unearths a treasure trove of archival live footage shot in the club. Icons like Dizzy Gillespie, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, Miles Davis, Roland Kirk, Nina Simone, Chet Baker, and more all perform. Along the way, Murray also shines the spotlight on the complex artist and entrepreneur Scott through a series of off-camera interviews with family, friends, former employees, and fellow artists. The results, which are currently streaming on Apple Plus, are essential viewing for jazz buffs, documentary lovers, and biography fans. As the film's long-delayed release date finally neared, Murray got on the Zoom from his new London home to discuss the making of Ronnies, his favorite moments in the film, his dream projects, and a lot more. Enjoy. First of all, Oliver Murray, thanks for doing this today. I really appreciate your time, and it is nice to meet you.
I'm very happy to be here. It's been a strange kind of release schedule of this film. I think we're probably accidentally going for the record for the longest possible kind of drawn out release you could imagine, because we finished the movie almost perfectly in time for, COVID starting to, I didn't know what COVID was when it first was mentioned. So the first, we screened this movie in London in October 2020. So right. the fact that it's going to be released in the US in a month or so is kind of wild, because that never really happens. But so much never really happens, but has happened in the last year or so. So here we are. Thank you for talking to me.
Well put. So much has not happened that has. Exactly. Well, listen, my compliments on the movie. I was intrigued when I first heard about it, I should say. And then having seen it now, it does not disappoint. It's really, fascinating, a great piece of work. When and how did you become involved with this project?
So I obviously, as a Londoner, and it's a British institution. So when the producers, there was a couple of producers, most notably Eric Woolard White, who it was sort of his dream to make a movie about that place for personal reasons. And I'd made a couple of things that were very archive heavy. Right. And I'd kind of come up through music videos, and I'd worked in music docs for not a huge amount of time, but I'd made some things I was quite pleased with, and he said, would I be interested? And my immediate reaction was, I'd be incredibly interested to go on that journey. I'm not the guy who's to be honest, I didn't really know much about the name behind I didn't know much about the character behind the name. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I will kind of go on this journey of discovery, and hopefully turn some younger ears on to what goes on at that place. And right. At the same time, kind of give people the lowdown of the great and the good that came through those doors, because almost everybody did. It was astonishing to be able to collect up the film clips and the photos and the music, and kind of get them all together and start making steps to put this movie together. It was an amazing journey.
Oh, I bet. What was it that intrigued you most, though, right up front? Was it the prospect of all the music, or was it more the story of the man himself, or were they kind of intertwined for you even at that point?
It was described recently by one of the taglines that the distributor of the movie's gone for is "Come for the music, stay for the story."
Yeah.
And I think that was my experience of making it as well.
Mm.
It's such an evocative place, and there's so many legendary stories and so many characters around Ronnie Scott's that I knew there would be stories, but I didn't know what they were going into it. I did know that we were going to get some great music because I was able to look at some of the archive recordings. So that was the first kind of huge carrot that sort of lured me in, and we started going through the music, and there's a hell of a lot of restoration required for a film like this. So the kind of secret, the unseen art involved in putting a movie together like this is getting a team of audio restorers and people that repair damaged film and things like that. So hopefully no one's thinking about that as the story's unfolding on the big screen, but if you'd seen what some of that stuff looked and sounded like before we actually managed to soap it up, it wasn't really up to the standards. So it was really a deep dive. It was sort of plunge into the dark, and I was incredibly pleased at what we uncovered.
Well, let's talk a little more about that archival footage. Where did it all come from? Was it all in one place, or was this something where you had to go down rabbit holes to find stuff?
It was a really nice mix, actually, because Ronnies, every 10 years, they had a kind of a 10-year dust up, as it were, where they let the BBC in for filming, and they arranged for some great players to sort of be showcased. So I knew that we would have these spikes of material that would help me show the development of the club, but we were really lucky. It was an interesting one. I most of my work involves lots of travel, and this was I've never made something where we were editing on the same street as the subject of the film. It never happens. So it was kind of the club sort of let the right people know that we were making it, and that this was all that we were kind of to be trusted. And certain people, they have shoeboxes of Polaroids and some of the kind of scraps of the headlines and the bits and pieces. My favorite thing to do is to strike the right balance of well-produced film clips from archives like the BBC and places like that, with, as I say, this kind of shoebox of private artifacts and personal memories. So I think a lot of making these kinds of films, a lot of it's about stamina, just holding in and having a team that are going to support you in kind of waiting and playing the long game. And our archive producer, James Hunt, is brilliant at kind of meeting people. He's always meeting them in the pub, and he'll sort of,
we're better.
Exactly. And so I think it's an excuse for him to sort of hang out in the Soho pubs. But actually, if you hang out in the Soho pubs with your ears open,
you could have edited there too.
Yeah, maybe the every sort of, every couple of weeks, someone would appear and say they had a piece of the story to tell, or some footage, or I guess with jazz as well, you get real enthusiasts, almost like no other kind of enthusiast for other kinds of music, where there's a willingness to preserve and a sort of love for the detail. And those kinds of people are so valuable to you when you're making a documentary, because they kind of give you the keys and open up all these avenues to go down, because they know at least where there's breadcrumbs where we can follow to try and find this material. And that's
were there a couple of finds that were, things that really were, wow, special. I can't believe this came up,
Yeah, I can't believe that the Miles Davis footage was lost. I mean, we kind of, if memory serves well, we kind of found that by accident.
Wow.
And I think it just said jazz at Ronnie. It didn't even say Ronnie Scott. I think it said jazz something on this old reel that was actually, don't ask me why, but there was a time when obviously tape was very expensive in the early 70s. So even if it was recorded on tape for television, it would then be archived on 16mm film. So it didn't last very long, but I think in that process, all it takes is a few names to be lost off of the label and it's gone. So we found this Miles Davis reel. And he's one of those names that you sort of assume almost maybe like Dylan or the Beatles, or that you would think these archives know when there's a financial value to this to this kind of material, it's found and lovingly preserved. But that was an amazing thing to feel like, as well as being able to put it in the film, it's logged properly again and is kind of one of those things that's there for future generations. That was great. And then also I was really pleased that we were able to tell the stories of the Jimi Hendrix, sort of the beat in the film about him. Not that I want to give anything away too much to the people that haven't seen it yet, but there's some great Jimi Hendrix moments in there, and some Van Morrison and people who you wouldn't strictly say are jazz musicians. And that was another thing that I was very pleasantly surprised about in the first few weeks of making the film. Was jazz is often seen as this quite closed off, quite highbrow kind of music, and therefore quite closed to outsiders. But actually, someone like Ronnies, they're all music lovers. They all have their ears open. They all want new sounds, and they all give sounds a chance, because that's ultimately what jazz is about, exploration. And it doesn't surprise me at all that someone like Jimi Hendrix, who has the serious playing chops, or someone like Van Morrison with that voice, of course they would be let into Ronnie's and embraced in that space, and vice versa. They loved being there because good music is good music. And that was something that I hope, if people kind of come out of curiosity to want to know more about this place, I think they may be pleasantly surprised at how varied the kinds of music are that get played in a place like Ronnie's.
Right. I want to thank you also for doing something that so few music documentaries do well, and that is you have some of these performances run pretty much intact from start to finish, as opposed to here's 10 seconds of it and then bam onto something else, which is something that drives me personally crazy, because when you see this great archival footage of Van Morrison and Chet Baker, or Ella Fitzgerald or Buddy Rich or whoever, you want to see the whole song. And a lot of the times in the movie you do that. But I mean, there must have been some painful edits for you when you're going, geez, I would just love to let this, 7 or 8 minute song play out completely.
Let it run. Yeah. I share your frustration, and I think, knowing what it's like kind of in the trenches of making this stuff, it's usually always down to cost.
Of course.
That it'll be a per second thing. So I understand that. But then I said quite early on that I wanted to treat the musical performances in a way in which someone like Ronnie Scott or Pete King would treat the music.
Right.
It's a stage where the people there are very reverential. It's not a place where the audience comes first at all. You are there to listen to music, and if you have a great time and have some nice food, it's a supper club at the end of the day, but the music comes first. And Ronnie, if would in the middle of sets, would throw people out if they disrespected that ethos. So I said, we need to be ready to let these performances play out, because of the environment that we're trying to conjure. That if you can't get across to London to Ronnie Scott. So I hope that this film is the next best thing of a taste of what old Soho was like, and what Ronnie's was like in its heyday, and sort of continues to fly the flag for that kind of reverence to the music. So the movie needed to operate in the same fashion.
Right. Well, let's talk a bit more about the man, because obviously it's a very double-barreled documentary, and it's really well balanced. I mean, I don't want to leave people with the impression that it's just a series of performance clips, because they are interspersed with this biography, if you will, of Ronnie and the club and his business partners and his whole really life and career. How was it? Was it difficult to sort of find that balance and that flow?
Yeah, I think so. It's always I had a great editor, Paul Truartha, who's was a fantastic. He led that process really, I would say, because yeah, you're always worried that maybe it's a bit like having two tape recorders, and you have sort of your playlist of music on one and the story on the other, and every time you press play on one, it's gonna stop the other, and how do you mesh them together? But it was just picking the right music for the right time, I think, the right mood, and music that served the story. So yeah, there was some great bits. There's a great, it still kills me now, there's a great Jeff Beck live at Ronnie Scott's, and he plays A Day in the Life,
Right,
just him and the guitar, and that was in for and everyone signed, Jeff Beck signed it off, that we got permission from McCartney and everyone, that yeah, no problem. And then we had to pull it out because it didn't serve the story, and at the end of the day, that's what matters. So it's always hard, but it kind of, I guess, if it's really still sort of tough at the end, you're in a good place, really. You've got,
and that's what the DVD is for down the line, right?
Yeah,
all these extras.
yeah, the things that fall by the wayside are you kind of hope that, even though I might miss them because I knew they were there, the art, I suppose, is to present something that doesn't feel like you're missing anything or wished you had anything else extra at all. So I've made my peace with it, as I always have to do with each project, and we have a fantastic lineup. There's no other way of putting it.
Oh yeah, and again, the story about the man himself is fascinating. I really didn't know much about Ronnie Scott aside from the basics. He was a saxophone player. He ran this club. And I don't think, geez, I might know that might be two more facts than most North Americans know about him at all. Is he? I mean, did you know a lot about him? Is he much more well known in a pop cultural sense over there?
No, not to my
part of his character,
No, I think anyone under 50 would know the club, right, and not the man. And as I say, the club is an institution, right, and it's just even I just never stopped and thought, Ronnie Scott's, yeah, that was a guy who walked the streets of Soho that I walk, and there's a story to be had there. But yeah, he was known because he was also very funny. So he held court in the club, and he went on TV shows, and he was a kind of TV personality as well as a musician. Right. I think actually maybe sometimes that got in the way of his true. He was a real musician that needed music. He didn't just enjoy it. I think music was Ronnie's medicine for his demons. And of course, when he lost the ability to play music in his older years, he didn't stick around for much longer, because that was such a vital part of his whole being. Yeah, that the man sort of came to me in these fragmented bits and pieces of interviews, and it's always interesting when someone as complex as that comes together in a documentary such as this, because he was different things to different people. Mm-hmm. I think he was what he needed to be to certain people. He was a real alpha male in the environment of the club, but he was also a father. He had quite a number of long-term relationships, mostly sort of centered around the club, and a TV personality, and proud Londoner, proud East End, working class Jewish lad who had a dream, and that dream came true. He was full of complexity, which makes him a great subject for a documentary.
Yes. Well, I mean, do you think that was kind of the key to him, that compartmentalization almost of things?
I think a huge component of his personality is having someone like Pete King, his business partner. Right. Because if you have that safety net, if your best friend is your business partner, and you're both involved in your absolute life's passion, then for Ronnie, he could sort of really soar into areas that he couldn't do alone. And I think he kind of, he has sort of the Icarus syndrome of, he did fly too close to the sun in a number of ways, but what self-respecting jazz musician isn't doing that, whether with their music or their excesses or whatever? It's what enabled him to live a full life the way he wanted to live.
Very true. Aside from the bookending footage that's shot in the club now, everything else is archival. And I found it interesting that you just use voiceovers even for the more contemporary interviews, as opposed to, cutting to whoever, Sonny Rollins or whoever, you spoke to for this. What was behind that decision?
That's sort of become my way of working now, because there's a huge difference between me turning up with a backpack, which is my laptop, my interface, and my mic, and asking 8 people to turn up in a van, set up 2 hours. It just takes the pressure off. And some of these people, especially the sort of high profile people, they know that difference. So it's often the difference between them wanting to do it or not. B, if they do it, it means that I can stay. I'm completely self-contained. I can stay all day if that's what they want to do. They can stop, they can take a phone call, whatever. It's just so much easier, and therefore the content, I think, that you get more of their personality, you get more time with them, you could go back and do pickups again. So it just takes the pressure off of everyone concerned in an interview setup. Interviews are, I think, often seen as being quite simple to kind of schedule and arrange and all that sort of stuff, but they're really not. So there was that element of it. And then also, because Ronnie himself was not around, what I wanted to do was keep everything sort of focused on him. So you see him in the archive material, but given that these people, some of them are in their 90s, talking about something that happened in the late 50s, it's actually just more of a distraction to see what they look like now or what their circumstances are like now, because it doesn't really have any bearing on the story. So I'd much rather see them as players in their prime, or, you know, if we have imagery of them in the late 50s, that's what we used. And in this instance, it worked and became our palette, if you like.
Well, I liked it because visually too, it keeps you in the story. You know, you're never pulled out and then dropped back in. It just makes it a little more flowing and seamless. Talking about those interviews, was there one that really stood out for you?
I have a weird detachment with interviews, because you prep, you know what you want, and you're so focused on what's being said and the story, and I'm almost editing it in my head, that I can kind of divorce myself and the fact that it's Sonny Rollins, you know, or Quincy Jones. If in the middle of it I suddenly let my brain whir into gear properly and actually start to contemplate that it's Quincy Jones, you just sort of, your brain goes to jelly. So I have this weird, like, delayed fuse almost that goes off when the interview starts, but it sometimes it might even just be the weekend or whatever, and I'm walking around and suddenly I know I hear a particular piece of music and I think, oh yeah, that's Q. It's
as you now call them.
Absolutely, yeah. Funnily enough, the I could talk a little bit about we then went ahead and we did a 3-part TV series on the history of the Montreux Jazz Festival.
Yeah, that looks great too.
Which was all because of Mr. Jones. And so, yeah, I take the experiences of making it with me, really, and I'm able to make peace with. Documentaries are ultimately taken away from you by producers, because not because they're unfinished or not ready, but just because there's always something to talk about. So the aim is to move on to the next one and sort of take the learnings and the experiences of making it, of making the previous one into the next one, and just get better and better and more nuanced, and really have a point of view and have something to say. And that's usually always through the experiences of making it, rather than say what I may have learnt about the subject along the way. So this one's very special to me because it was done in the most kind of independent of ways, with some very passionate people, which you kind of can't imagine a movie about Ronnie Scott's being made any other way. You know, if it was too easy, it would almost be like cheating. And it got financed, you know, patchwork financing, so a bit here, a bit there, waiting for checks to come in, hoping that we can still afford to pay the crew in 2 weeks' time. It kind of works out that way on these kinds of things, and feeds into the kind of passion and the energy and the momentum of the final product.
Talking about what you learned, were you a jazz buff going into this? And if not, are you one now? Did it, make you more of a fan?
No, I wouldn't say I was a jazz buff. I learned quite quickly making documentaries about sort of music, that things like music being defined by genre is less and less interesting to me now, especially when I just don't think jazz gets it doesn't have a good rep, if you like, in the mainstream sense, because there's some fantastically listenable stuff that I really love, and I was really happy to be able to celebrate all the different sounds in this documentary. So, I mean, I was a trumpet player growing up as a teenager, so I loved Chet Baker, and from a personal standpoint, being able to get some of him in was a fantastic. It's a shame that he was such a charismatic, beautiful looking, beautiful player, and just to see him there at the end. I would have loved it if we had something, from maybe 10, 15 years previous, but
Right.
It's so delicate and so precise. It was fantastic. So I love good musicianship. So I guess by definition, I love so much of jazz. I'm not so keen on when it becomes academic, but there's so much good stuff out there that all players like Sonny Rollins who are all about feel, and it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. We're in a fantastic time at the moment, certainly in London just before the pandemic. There were some amazing players coming through, young players, this kind of idea of bedroom music making, kind of like bedroom jazz, if you like, with this merging of technology and electronics, with this kind of reverence, I suppose, to what came before. And I'm excited for those players to get back on the road and see what they've been up to in recent times.
Now, so you also did the Bill Wyman documentary, the quiet one, and you've got this Montreux 3-parter coming up. Are you finding that music is going to be the pathway going forward, or are you kind of eager to maybe do some more work that's not music related?
Yes, the latter. I love music, and I could continue working in that space for a long time, but then I could see myself getting a bit comfortable, perhaps.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I'm a filmmaker and a storyteller, so I'll go where the good stories are. If they continue to be in music, then I'll stick around. But I am wary of taking on a music project, for instance, unless there was a really fantastic story to be told, something that the music is speaking to, or a life that where the music is the soundtrack to an amazing character. I think we're drawn to characters, and the music catalogs come as your friend, because also from a marketing perspective, people are quite excited to make it, but that's not enough gas to put in your tank to get over the line for a really compelling documentary. Funnily enough, actually, as a project I can't really talk about, which I've just started to make, and having declared quite loudly that I think I'm going to move away from music. I got offered a particular band,
a particular band we would all know the name of.
Yeah, most definitely.
And is this another archival based thing?
There's an element of that. So it was a kind of I just thought to myself, do you know what? If it's really if I pass and it ends up being an amazing project, I'll be so annoyed at myself. I don't think the world will mind if I stick around in the music space for a little while and then look for something else afterwards. So I'm still working in music for the foreseeable future.
All right. Do you have a dream project?
I do, and to be honest, I should probably not talk about them too loudly, because they're very delicate dreams, and it would only take a couple of wrong moves for them to disappear.
Can you sort of color around the edges of it, maybe?
Well, I'd say that. I mean, if if Axl Rose or Slash are listening, I've always said that I would love to do Welcome to the Jungle, the story of Appetite for Destruction, for a it might seem strange going from talking about Ronnie Scott's documentary to Guns N' Roses, but I was born in 1985, so when I picked up a guitar, that was the record. That was the one that just blew me away, and I think there's enough. It wouldn't be it would. I'm also a real fan of projects that go into quite forensic detail about specific time periods, and I think that times like that, LA in that particular time period in itself is interesting, let alone some of the music that came out of it for that. And it's of a time when you got real bands, real bands coming through town and tearing things up. So that's today's dream. We're not sure what tomorrow's dream will be, but life is what happens as you're making other plans, as John Lennon said. So I just keep gravitating towards the interesting projects, and hopefully they turn out as good as you hope.
Perfect. Well, listen, thanks. I think that's all I've got. We covered everything, didn't we?
Yeah, no, I'm very happy. As I say, it's exciting to have this thing come out on your side of the pond, because it's a very, in a lot of ways, on the face of it, it's a very British movie, but I'm really pleased that it's having a more sort of global, it's resonating with people. And I think it's resonating with people because Ronnie Scott's is a special place for me as someone who has lived in London for so long. And I know that everyone has a special venue or a cinema or even a restaurant locally that in the last year, some of those places are casualties of COVID. And I think that we thought maybe that all these places would stay around forever. And if there's one kind of positive thing to come out of all these lockdowns and all the economic woes, it's that we need to get out there and support all the places that we love. We're the places we get our entertainment from, need us to turn up and be an audience for them, because we had kind of had a taste of what it might be like to not be able to either go to them or that they may just not be able to function in our communities. So I think there's for me it's Ronnie Scott's, but for you it'll be something local to you, and that's all over the world. It's played in Russia, and it's played in Australia, and so the fact that it's coming out, almost coming home in a lot of ways. Ronnie Scott built Ronnies in the mold of those American clubs that he could only get to because he played his way on the Queen Mary just so he could go and get a taste of the real thing.
Go to the Three Deuces and go to New York.
So it was he was just a kid with a dream, and I think we got to take those shots. If this inspires other people to either start new venues or support the ones that are currently there, then it can only be a good thing.